This is the first chapter of an unbelievable story, but it's not the beginning. It's a story of forgotten greatness. It's a story of resurrection. This is Mike from Figs Engineering, and I'd like to invite you to come along on our 2-day journey to New York to rescue an amazing IS300 from a dusty grave. Now, back in the day, it ruled as the king of horsepower, but we were about to find out whatever became of IS Man. Yo, Ilya. Hey, it's Fig. I need to pick up a car in New York. So in a matter of 4 days, my buddy Ilya and I had planned a trip to New York. By coincidence, he had already had a truck and trailer out there and was planning to bring the vehicle back himself. We would just need to bring the straps and D-rings to secure the vehicles to the hardwood floor of the trailer. He had a broken heel and would need my help. I'm not sure how it could have worked out any better. So, with several choices going into New York, we got stuck with LaGuardia. It's perhaps the worst airport in the world. The only consolation is flying over Manhattan, where you get to view this huge metropolis as a scale model from the sky. Our flight was a half an hour early, but sure enough, the bags were an hour late. You got us again, LaGuardia. Next, it was time to tackle the ground transportation. Our original ride bailed because of traffic, so we were looking for another way to get to Brooklyn. The taxis and Ubers were outrageous since we were right next to the airport. Our solution? Hop on a rental car shuttle and walk 3 minutes to get an Uber ride that was nearly half the price. The trip to Brooklyn would be tangled and time-consuming. Like everything in New York, everyone is doing it with you at the same time. It's like taking a shower in gym class. Required but unpleasant. By the time we met the Jeep, it was pushing 9 hours from our last meal, so food became the priority. With New York being a food mecca, we could not waste our stomachs on just any grub. It was Turkish gyros that made the cut. With overly full stomachs, we proceeded to the next destination, the truck. Another hour on the clock to pass the 29 miles in what seemed like minimal traffic. Now, number one, when we booked this trip, I hadn't realized, first of all, this was a full-blown semi. I was envisioning a U-Haul truck for some strange reason. And second, New York City is close to impossible to navigate a commercial vehicle, especially with a 53-foot trailer. There's vehicle regulations, overpass clearances, there's a lot of things to consider. And our path was restricted because we couldn't take parkways. Our GPS was telling us it would be an hour and a half to go all the way around the city. And we were wrestling with a lot of different smart devices to try to get decisions made quickly. The answer ended up being the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway via the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which had a lax regulation after hours which allowed us to pass. Our arrival time after all this ended up being 10 p.m., which was way later than we thought. And I guess we were looking at things with Colorado eyes and travel times, but it just didn't seem like that long of a distance. But I can't tell you how relieved I was to arrive at the location. After 100 different decisions that we'd made in the last few days and hours, it was just a relief to finally make it. I was anxious to finally see what the condition of the car was and what we would be up against. Now, since it was too late to work on the car that evening, we decided to go out with Charles and take in some of the New York nightlife. Our evening concluded around 3 a.m. with some delicious empanadas. The next day, it was time to boogie. We had to hurry up and extract the vehicle, plus we knew that the exit strategy with the semi would be somewhat of a challenge given the time of day. Our local law enforcement had decided to make an example of our semi, giving both truck and trailer a ticket totaling some $270. To start to describe the car when I first saw it in person, It was a huge rush of just fond memories, but muddled in with the current picture that I couldn't ignore. The space it was occupying was cramped. It was filled with the remains of office equipment and shelving that Charles had from his recent business closure. And some of this stuff had just invaded over the last month, which probably made it look a lot worse than it had previously been. I was definitely taken back by details, good and bad, and as I slowly surveyed the car, I just noticed so many things. I think the part of the car that I always remembered was the way the compressor housing was clocked and how the intercooler piping had to take a sharp curve that was high, and it was a great place to mount those twin blow-off valves. There was going to be a lot to address once we got it back to the shop. The Jeep was the first to get loaded because having it be further forward would provide better load distribution. And then it was the IS that would pick up the rear of the vehicle. Aside from a really flat tire that actually made a pretty funny impression in the concrete, a dead battery that prevented us from rolling the windows down more than they were, the car actually moved pretty easily, with two guys pushing on it and a Russian with a broken heel. Flatbed didn't have any clearance problems with the front bumper, which was one of the things that we were worried about, and everything actually worked out pretty darn good, which was a huge sigh of relief. The trailer, which had recently been a transport for FD Livestream equipment, needed to be converted to hold the vehicles down. So it was my job to anchor the D-hooks for strapping into the hardwood floor of the 53-footer for both cars. 3 rings per tire, 2 per vehicle anchored. We secured the cars and worked on the extra payload, the 2 sets of extra wheels, OE seats, bumpers, and other things that went with the car, even an unopened Blitz spoiler that was part of the package. With everything loaded, it was time to make our exit, a true escape from New York. Given the time of day, our only option would be the George Washington Bridge via the 295, and we'd drop the truck off at the Vince Lombardi service station. Apparently New York loves U.S. presidents and football players to name their truck stops. Even with Charles running interference in a separate car to help us navigate lane changes, it was a painful trip. This was a grueling 3 lanes of crawling commercial trucks, all trying to escape the city, through the high-walled, chained-in section of the Bronx. As we slowly crawled along, there were beggars and breakdowns. There was even an NSX. As we crossed the bridge, like magic, we finally had a breakthrough in traffic, passing through the New York perimeter into New Jersey. The tough part was close to an end, and we found one of the last parking spots at the truck stop. It was being perhaps unintentionally reserved by this guy in the Mercedes, as he was picking up another driver. We left the truck to be picked up by one of Ilya's drivers, who would take it back to Colorado the following week. It was time to soak up any more New York experience we could, and we all agreed to a steak dinner at Uncle Jack's Meat House in Astoria. The meal, while assuredly expensive, fell short of the mark, as the steak was served cold and the location had no seafood. See my Google review. The only consolation for me was a cute beagle mix that happened to be passing by, which I gave my last ounces of attention to for the day. I got 2 old beagles at home. What can I say? We made it back to LGA for the return flight and relished the last few minutes in the airport for one final scoot down the jet bridge to our seats, where we settled in for the 4-hour return. Landing around 1 a.m., I decided to just push a little bit more and drop Ilya off, even though it was 50 minutes out of my way. Perhaps I was invigorated by the sense of achievement the trip had given me, or maybe the whole experience was still sinking in, but I rolled into my house around 3 a.m., still with a bit of surrealness as I reflected on the last 48 hours. We'd achieved everything we'd set out to do in such a short time, and I was anxious for the next chapter of the story, when the car would be at its new home, Figs Engineering.